to day 2 of the ministerial debates. Today we are joined by Prime Minister Westcott, Minister QI, Prime Minister Thoughtful Janitor, and Lieutenant Prime Minister Jagal. For tonight's debate, we'll start off with the opening statements, followed by 8 to 10 questions, depending on if there's viewers' questions or not. And then we'll move on to closing statements. And then we'll end the stream from there. This should be about an hour long, depending on if we have any distractions or not. Thank you. Now, let's move on to opening statements. You all have, just like day 1, you all have 2 minutes to make your case for yourself, introduce to the audience. I'll start off with you, Prime Minister Westcott. You have 2 minutes to do your opening statements, starting now.
Thank you, Retro. Uh, I'll keep this kind of brief. Um, what we need in the ministry right now is solid military tactics. So I want to continue as general for this term to finish the war in England. We need good economic policy, and I have been basically the mastermind of our foreign trade for quite a while, which is where a lot of our money is coming from. And we need decisive leadership to bring us to the close of the game, which is what I believe I can offer with my extensive experience as Prime Minister and Lieutenant Prime Minister. That's really it. And also, of course, preserving environmentalism.
Thank you, General Westcott. Next up, QI, Mr. QI. Your time starts now.
Right. So, I mean, sort of everyone sort of knows what my platform is, and that platform at its core is peace. I guess really the only part of my platform that isn't uh, as clear to everyone is my pro-science platform, and I mean that's something deeply ingrained in the PGC's values, and the I was actually rather concerned when it came to choosing ideologies, which of them would really be most beneficial for our science, and uh, was interested in the question of the best conditions under which objective science can take place. Um, whether ideology, in the case of uh, say the Soviet Union, could interfere with biology, as was the case in Lysenkoism, or whether it was private companies sort of employing scientists to verify their own sort of biased hypotheses. And ultimately, I came down on the side of a government-sponsored science. But I don't know. I think of myself in a sort of social democratic light.
Is that all?
That's all for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, QI. Next, Prime Minister Thoughtful. You have 2 minutes, starting now.
You may have heard of me. I'm Thoughtful Janitor. I've been a bit of a rising star for a while now, and I'm part and a co-founder of the New Arabia Party, which has a tradition of trying to be very efficient and to seek compromise and coalition, which we levied a lot during the fourth term, and we passed a bunch of laws, including the Kobe Nova Special Administrative Region Act, to actually implement solid domestic policy and solid growth. And I think that really showed when Hippo Regius this term was able to produce most of the fleet with which we defended our land. And I'm running to end the game on a platform of space exploration, which is a lot of where I'm coming from. I get that war versus peace is a very debatable opinion, sorry. And that's not really where I position myself where New Arabia positions itself. We're looking towards the future. And so that's why I'm going into the ministry. I'm going into the ministry this term to organize a quick end to the game in the form of space exploration.
Is that all?
That is all.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Thoughtful. And Jagal, your time starts now.
Well, first of all, I would like to just dissolve a common misconception that everyone in New Arabia are pacifists. We do not have a standing platform for that. So We are more a conglomeration of people that believe in science and economical development, as well as the education of our people. In that way, I would like to propose as that in collaboration with ThoughtSul, we would try to improve education, and we will have a pretty responsible economic policy where we wouldn't waste our money on any unnecessary purchases, but instead we will use it and save it for developing our lands and our people. In that way, right now what we have to do is focus on our research so that we can finally become the superior nation and leave Earth, not only for us, but for every single country that, on every single person that has any bearing of mankind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now let's move on to some questions. And first, I would like to ask something specific to you, Mr. Prime Minister Janitor. You have 1 minute to respond to this, and if anyone wants to jump in afterwards, they'll get 30 seconds or a minute. Okay, here we go. Although you have advocated against previous war proposals, such as the war against China, you've been adamant with your support for the Anglo-Arabian War. What makes this war different from other potential wars to the point where you would throw your support behind it? You have 1 minute to respond, starting now.
So, the Oxford War has always been kind of a plan to try and focus the ministry on one thing for this term, because the problem when you want to go to space or you want to win a diplomatic victories, which have been my two goals for the last couple months, the atomic era. Sorry?
There was
You cut off for a second. I'll stop the clock.
Oh, so the problem when you want a science victory or diplomatic victory, like I want for a while, like I have wanted for a couple of months, is that there's a bridge between the industrial era and the atomic era, where the only thing you unlock are units, and so you have finished building up your economy, you have finished developing a lot of your land, and so at this point, what generally happens is a lot of war. And the idea of the English war was twofold. First, we take out our main geopolitical enemy, we secure our city-state alliances, we secure our trade routes over the seas, and we secure our continents, which have been the main geopolitical goals of this war. And second, we get the ministry occupied on something to get us the time to research what we need for the Apollo program, for spaceship parts, etc. And the goal of keeping peace mostly on the Arabian continent has been achieved. Like, there has been no war with China or Poland, which has been one of the main goals of this war. And the way I see it, and maybe people don't accept it, it was the closest we would get to pacifism this term. And so I supported the Oxford War from a very pacifist standpoint.
Okay. Thank you. Would everyone like to respond to his statements? Anyone?
I suppose I have a relatively quick response. So,
You may go.
I mean, I do recognize your sort of consequentialist argument in favor of war with China as opposed to war elsewhere on the continent, and it is plausible that had we gone to war with China, there would have been more casualties. But at the same time, I still don't like. There's more to my value theory than just consequentialism, and like war in the service of like not going to war with someone else doesn't seem quite right to me.
It's a moral question, and I'm entirely consequentialist. So to me, the question wasn't necessarily swung where your opinion landed.
All right. Is that all for comments on that question? Speak now, forever hold your peace.
Actually, I'll make one other remark.
Okay.
Something that made the English War certainly different from the war against Carthage to liberate Warsaw was that that was explicitly a war of liberation. And Arch had a very eloquent declaration of war in the Punic War Act that just wasn't there in the Oxford War Bill. And like, even though I didn't particularly like either, I felt like the war against Carthage had some justification, whereas this was just an imperialistic sort of war.
That's a point actually. That's a good point. And my answer to that is twofold. First off, the Oxford War Bill was drafted quite quickly because our internal organization didn't function properly at that time due to personal reasons. So the bill was written quite quickly, and moral considerations weren't the first on our list. And second off, I still managed what I wanted to try, which was not to entirely subjugate Oxford, and this is why they are still under their own independent state, which is not one of the main Arabian states.
Is that so?
Yeah,
They're
the
currently
game
not.
calls the game calls that a puppet city, but it's not getting annexed anytime soon.
It's a puppet city. It is technically in the state of Mecca. As all
But the
cities
governor of
have.
Mecca doesn't have influence over it.
That's
mean,
fair.
Arguably it does. Doesn't really matter. It is just a game technicality to say that. Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments, or we're moving on to the next question? I'm taking that as moving on to the next question. All right. Staying on the war path. This was asked before in night one, but it bears repeating. As Oxford falls into our grasp, calls for peace can be heard throughout Arabia. However, an equally large voice for the war's continuation can also be heard. As minister, would you push for a quick peace with England or continue the war effort? I'll start with General Westcott. You have a minute to respond starting now.
I believe quite simply that all of the goals we set out to achieve in this war have not yet been completed. Namely, our main goals were to, yes, take Oxford, which is the important first step, but also severely and permanently damage the English hegemony over their continent. They were getting too strong, too rich, and they were becoming a threat to us. So what we need to do still is continue to take out their navy so that they cannot project their strength and weaken their homeland so that they cannot just rebuild it and we have this again in 20 years. Even if the game is over, technically we're still fighting the English. So this war is to completely pacify England, and we have not gotten there yet.
All right, thank you. Now I'll move this on to Mr. QI. You have 1 minute to respond starting now.
So, we have lost many lives in this war. We lost the lives of the missionaries whom the English so brutally massacred in Khorasan Bay. We've lost the lives of some of our own soldiers, but we've also inflicted a terrible number of civilian casualties. The siege of Oxford caused the death or displacement of 200,000 people or more, and I don't want to see more people die because of this war. And like more death is basically inevitable if this war were to continue. And I guess the question of English hegemony, I don't really know how grave a threat England is to us. I mean, they've not been aggressive to us before. They might be now that we've provoked them, but like we didn't really to declare war, and it's alienated us from our allies. It's alienated us from Germany. It's alienated us from other powers who now see us in a quite different light because we've suddenly like jumped on the opportunity to attack Oxford.
Can I respond to
Thank
that?
you,
And it's hurt
thank
our
you, thank you,
economy.
thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Jesus,
You
can
went
I
over
respond?
time, but that's fine.
Can I respond?
Yeah. No, actually, you can
I just
respond in the open forum,
okay?
which is this is an open forum question. So, thoughtful, can you go? You have the minute. Go.
Okay, so my main goal with the Oxford War, foreign policy-wise, has always been to try and minimize casualties, to diminish England's position as a geopolitical superpower, and to avoid war with China. And as such, I think we still have some effort to do in disbanding the English Navy, because it is a well-known fact that the English influence over the world is only carried by their navy. And as such, they stop being a threat once their navy once the navy is gone, which is what I think is the only reason to continue the war at this point, is because the English navy was huge, still is, and so we still have work in that regard. Outside of that, I will push for peace.
Thank you, thoughtful. Jiga, you have 1 minute to respond to the question. Would you like the question to be repeated?
Yes, please.
The question is, would you push for an early peace with England or continue the war effort? As in, keep fighting the English. Would you like your minute to start?
Well, so
Alright, go.
I've never been a friend of England, and I personally always push to be careful with England. In that way, I would say that, as Wes and Janitor say, the war is not over yet, and we cannot simply take what we have gotten and leave, because the English are very likely to retaliate if we do that. They will never forget this aggression, and the only way to ensure the safety of our nation is to take them into a point where they will not be able to retaliate. I'm not talking about destroying them. I'm only talking about getting their military down to a point where they will not be able to attack us in any time soon.
Alright, thank you. Now, you will have the open forum for 5 minutes, and I'll like to start off with Westcott because he wants to respond to QI's
Yeah,
initial
so
statement.
a few things QI said. One was that this war hurt us diplomatically with our allies. Uh, Indonesia has actually come back to us over the course of this war, and they're now our friends again. Which for a while there was some tense relationships with our uh, communist comrades to the south. Um, and Berlin is separated from us not because of the war. I believe it was more from other factors of them just not appreciating our help, which means we didn't have a lot of positives with them. So the global negative started to stack up a little bit. But I don't believe that was solely warmongering at all. Usually that kind of you don't get that much of a warmongering penalty at the start of the war, which is when they got mad at us, which is how you can tell that. I would also like to say that the 200,000 number for the siege of Oxford is wildly exaggerated. Uh, there was shelling by battleships on defensive positions to take the city, and a swift marine action from our destroyer to capture it. But to say that 200,000 people somehow died is absolutely ridiculous.
It's what we see when just looking at the numbers straight. You can try to express that you don't actually think the causes are what we think they are, but fact of the matter, there are 200 people in Oxford less than there were at the start of the war.
I believe
Which
I believe they are refugees. They left the city because of the siege, perhaps, but uh, they are not just all dead
that
in a mass grave.
Even so, it's still a terrible problem.
It is not.
that
It's not perfect, but I think there's a big difference, and saying that 200,000 people died is just false.
I think that the refugee hypothesis would hold a lot more ground if the neighboring cities actually grew when we took the city or when we sieged it, but it didn't. So, like, you would expect a population growth in neighboring cities if people entered.
Maybe the pops are only citizens. This is just RP thinking, but I mean that would make sense to me if the pops on any given city were the citizens. So these refugees aren't counted as citizens. But this is all, of course, some hypotheticals. And since we don't have a storyteller, we can't really determine that.
You voted against the only
That's
candidate.
because
But anyway.
Ware is a bad person for the job, quite simply. He's
Okay.
pretty biased historically.
Okay. So everyone, we
Actually,
could. You have one question? Go. Yeah, go.
So I'd sort of like to respond to the New Arabia position concerning continuing the war, and I guess there's I do question the premise that England is projecting its power internationally by using its navy. So first of all, remember that they have the order ideology, and uh, like it's not as though they have autocracy or freedom where they're explicitly using, say, gunboat diplomacy. I think it has to do with their espionage network. I think they're uh, playing unfairly with city-states, with rigging of elections and coups. I think that's a considerable problem, and we really don't have a way to deal with that, other than by investing in city-states.
That's definitely true.
The English Navy does have a lot of sway simply by being there, being on our coasts. Like we've worried a lot about Khorasan over the last couple of streams when we saw English fleets show up, and the fact that they're able to put other states, other nations of the world in such a state of crisis and of urgency spending just over fees of the mighty Navy is proof that there's a lot of power being projected.
I would also like to say that not necessarily their navy, but an argument for their land army is they've recently completely razed a Dutch city. Uh, I think that's one of the most heinous acts of the past few centuries, right up there with the Dutch burning of our ally Germany's Hamburg. When the Dutch burned Hamburg, I wanted to go to war with the Dutch. It wasn't very popular, but I believed that since they were uh, they had horrible actions on the world stage, just burning entire cities
What?
in a bloody war.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to go to war with them for. And
Okay.
it might not have been popular, but I feel like that's what we need to strive for in these wars. And it's the same reasoning in England right now.
All right. Thank you, Wes. So the 5 minutes are up, and now it's on to the next question. Blah, 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 blah. Jagow, since you have been talking, I'll ask a question specifically to you. You have 1 minute to respond, and if anyone wants to make comments, they can afterwards. But okay, let me go. Jagow, after your term as minister in the third government, you have stayed away from public life until a few days ago. Why did you decide now's the time to return to politics? Your time starts down, unless you want the question repeated.
Oh, sorry. That's fine. Well, as a matter of fact, I haven't been able to participate much in DCIP for the pretty much because of my IRL life right now. When university semester started, and I had to prepare for the exams. So, and as a matter of fact, the exam week just passed last week. So I consider it was a great time to return because I will have the time to give to DCIP once again. And that's actually why I pushed for the merger between New Arabia and ASG, because I believe that as a member of New Arabia, I will be able to make a bigger impact than with ASG. And all of our members approved, and our voting was unanimous. So here we are.
Thank you. Thank you. Would anyone make any comments about that, or move on to the next question?
I would like to say I look forward to having you back. You were very good back in the day. I believe you're my lieutenant prime minister.
All
Has
right.
been a
Thank
minute.
you.
Alrighty. Then in that case, we'll move on to the next question. Uh, um. Okay, here's another one that was asked last night, but bears repeating. As we approach several victory types, debates are brewing over which type we as a nation should strive for. As it stands, Arabia is at the doorstep of three victory types: domination, science, and diplomacy. Which, if any, do you advocate for and why? I'll start off with Westcott. You have 1 minute starting now.
So quite frankly, I at this point think the best decision for us is to go science victory. Um, it's just going to be uh, the most available, quickest path to victory. But really, I feel like diplomatic and cultural victory are would be also very good options. Diplomatic would be easier, but I feel like the value of a cultural victory is that it represents bringing the whole world in line with our views in a way. Uh, and I think that's the best way to have a stable Earth going forward into the future. Through
Thank,
conquest, there will be
thank,
rebellions, and through diplomacy, that's just bureaucrats. So I feel like the best way to really win would be cultural, but I believe
thank,
science is
thank,
our best option to pursue.
thank you, Wes. Now, next up is QI. Your minute starts now.
So as I said in my opening statement, uh, I strongly support a scientific victory, not a diplomatic victory. Um, I recognize the value of a cultural victory, as our Lieutenant Prime Minister has so expounded. I think that uh, overall the victory conditions reflect uh, a sort of Whig historical or Hegelian sort of interpretation of history that's latent to Civ, and that I probably disagree with, the kind of end of history kind of view. Uh, and I mean, I think that's kind of problematic, but I mean, for all intents and purposes, the science victory is very much the easiest for us. Diplomacy would be the next easiest, uh, and culture would be interesting. So, I mean, I guess the critique of the culture victory is it's not really realistic, and culture changes over time. Like, what does it mean to quantify over culture and tourism? I don't fully understand what that means.
Thank you. Thank you, QI. Thank you, QI. Next up is Thoughtful. Your minute starts now, unless you need the question repeated.
No, it's fine.
Okay.
I think it's been pretty clear that I have been running on a platform of science victory. Not because I necessarily despise the other types of victories. I think the domination victory is immoral, but I simply think the victories like cultural and diplomacy are just not practical at the stage where we are. Like, I took the time to count the diplomats and delegates to the World Congress with the number of city-states that are still independent. And even if we were allied with all the city-states, we couldn't win a diplomatic victory. So it would take many, many, many UN cycles. And this is why I think we need to go to space instead. Despite the fact that I have wanted diplomacy victory for a while, I just don't think it's feasible at this point, and this is why I'm pushing for space.
Alrighty. Thank you. Thoughtful. And now, Jagal. Well, which victory type should we go for? Your minute starts now.
Well, I would say that we should go for scientific victory, not because it is easy, but because the achievement becoming such having such technological prowess that we are able to leave Earth and go to another system would simply be decisive for everything. It would mean a diplomatic victory, it would mean a cultural victory, and it will also mean a military victory, if you may, because the technology needed for that will require all the efforts of our nation and will exalt us in a way that will not only leave us not only make us leave a mark on history but become history itself.
Alrighty. Thank you, everyone, for your responses. And I believe our open forum should start now. If anyone wants to start, please say so. But open forum will start now.
So
It seems like
I'd
we're
like to
kind of.
begin.
Oh, sorry. You
I'd
go.
like to begin by congratulating uh, Jagal on that view. I think it's quite a sound refutation of H. Kim's view as expressed in last night's debate.
Thank you.
So it seems like we're pretty much all in agreement that science is going to be uh, not only a good victory type, but a very achievable one in the near future. And I think that's a good consensus for us to have, since presumably some of us are going to be in the next ministry. Uh, I think that's definitely a good way to go with it, and having consensus about it is can be very valuable for having a stable and easy transition into it.
On the other hand, my fear with science is not the fact that we aren't in agreement with the goal, is that we disagree about the means. And disagreeing about the means likely means achieving the goal later than we could, which is why I think we need to have a clear roadmap to a spaceship construction. And the Union of Arabian States has started to push for some of this, and I congratulate them on this. And I hope that the ministry will be able to coordinate with them to be as efficient as possible.
That's actually a really good point. It is the governors who have to do this, which makes every governor race important, because every one of them may be needing to build spaceship parts in the near future. Um, but I think I'm not really sure what you mean by we might disagree on the means. At best, I would only disagree with building polluting spaceship factories to get it a little bit faster. I believe in our working Arabian, and I think they can do it themselves. To be honest, I don't think you need the expensive and dirty factories to achieve this goal.
I feel there are a couple points of disagreements with the means. Some of us will prefer peace as a way to focus our efforts. Some of us will not want to give up work while the spaceship construction is underway. Some of us will prefer using faith for great engineers to hurry production for spaceship parts. Some of us will prefer letting religious people have their independence and have their faith used however they want and not however the ministry wants. So there are going to be a couple points of conflicts along the way, and I feel those are going to create trouble if we don't organize quickly.
I guess that's fair, but I guess that's also why it is important that we can all get to that consensus fast, and we can get past these uh, roadblocks to the end goal. It's definitely going to be important to work through those early and get it out of the way fast.
Alrighty. Does anyone else have a comment to make, or we can move on to the next question? I'm taking that as we're moving on to the next. Alrighty. Since Wes, you were the last one to speak, I'll ask your personal question. Your tenure as minister has been marked by noticeable push to quote free the horses unquote
Yeah.
to the point where you have begun to encourage your governor to build forts in place of pastures to protect the free horses.
Mm-hmm.
How do these efforts and others like it benefit both the horses and the average Arabian citizen? You have 1 minute to respond, starting now.
Thank you, Retro, for the question. This is a very important question to me. Uh, the freedom of our horses, and keep in mind there is also some dirty minds closed through these fort policies. I think it's vital that we protect the Arabian environment for our children, our grandchildren, our grandchildren's children. Uh, it's one of the only resources that we can't get back if we let the world succumb to climate change and irreversible global warming. Then we might really need that spaceship to get to somewhere else. I'd like to get to space, but I don't want to leave a hellhole behind. Uh, and I think to talk about how it benefits the horses, uh, the forts protect them from poachers, sorry, for sure. But it also they're free to leave pretty much. They have large open pastures. They aren't, uh, confined to any spaces.
Thank.
Yeah, that's about
Just
it.
finish that statement, and I
I'm
think
good.
we need
Thank
to.
you.
Yeah, you're good.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Westcott. Does anyone want to respond to this?
I wanted to know how Wes's policy towards this would change given the fact that two acts regarding forts passed, one with an incredibly long name by Mouse King, and one called the Forts Act, which I wrote myself. How does your
So,
policy evolve given those new laws?
well, yeah. So speaking of those two laws, I believe it's something along the lines of protecting Arabian industry and workers' dignity, I believe. That's from Minister Mouse-King. I respect the bill, and I think it has some noble causes behind it. I don't personally support it, and I think the way it goes about achieving its goals might not be the way we should take environmental policy. Uh, but I don't see it as much of a threat to that policy at all, and I think the Forts Act, I personally believe it's unconstitutional by allowing the ministry to force the governors to do something with their workers. They have sole control. They should not be forced like this. Um, and I also think it's a partisan overstep from the legislature to pass something like this. It's very obviously just anti-environmental, and it has no real benefits. It seeks to ban building of forts, which really makes no sense.
I don't want to get into the debate because it's too long, but it would be too long. It's not my view on this. I feel we can move on to the next question, though, unless someone else has another comment.
All right,
Oh,
I
that's
guess
good.
I have
Sorry.
questions concerning your claims as to the purported safety or freedom that horses would experience
Yes.
in these horse forts as opposed to traditional pastures. And like, I guess you mentioned something about poachers. Like
Yeah, poachers.
I feel like I don't
PR?
know. I just don't really buy that narrative. I'll be honest. Much as I didn't buy their narrative that like people sort of fled the capture of Oxford, or thinking all the way back to Mark IV, the narrative of something involving zebras
Uh,
that happened at Timbuktu. But I won't bring that back up right now, I guess.
yeah, that
So,
never happened. I don't know.
yeah, for the poachers thing, I would like to refer you to this EPA report on the horse forts from our great speaker 14. Uh, it obviously shows that there was some defense against poachers and some increase
I
in
would like to point
biodiversity.
out that the investigator on this project, um, not only a member of MEAN, but also a member of the Defeatist
He is
Party.
not a member of me. He's a member of the
Oh, he's no longer? But
He has not been for quite some time.
really,
Yes.
even so, like, it isn't a strong endorsement of this report that, like, someone who's against Arabia's victory on the world stage authored this report, but I don't know.
I don't think yeah, I trust 14 enough that he was not considering our, I guess, global standing on the world stage when authoring this report about horse forts. Um, Horses have not been very relevant to the world stage in quite some time.
Well, actually, looking at this report more
Cavalry
carefully,
isn't exactly.
it refutes your claims concerning lack of adequate room in which the horses could
Yeah,
travel.
it's not a perfect report. This was taken at a if you fully read it, I believe it says the troops guarding the fort, sorry, had some issues. There were some issues
Yes,
with them.
that's
So
up
it was
there as
a
well.
poorly
So, it seems
managed
like
fort, but it's been fixed since. As soon as it came to my attention as commander of our armed forces and thus the guy in charge of this fort, uh, I've dealt with it.
Thank you all. I think we could move on from this. All right. Next question. Another one asked from last night, but bears repeating. Due to the occupation of Oxford as well as the crowding of our cities, the Empire's general happiness is at a historic low, nearing zero. Should this be a concern to the ministry or should this be ignored? If so, why and how do you plan to address this? If not, why? I'll start off with Jagal this time around because he hasn't had an opportunity to speak.
Sorry,
Your minutes.
can you repeat the question, please?
Should the drop in happiness in our empire be a concern to the ministry?
Oh, okay. Well, any European happiness in our empire is obviously a concern of us. Our constituents need to be kept happy. Because if they are not happy, that means they are not getting everything they need. In that way, I would say that if the drop in happiness is considerable to get us in the red, we should definitely address that. Not only because it will stop growth, but also because it may lead to further consequences that may hinder us in the future and actually may be dangerous enough to stop our plans of expansion to the space.
All right. Thank you, Jago. Next will be janitor. Your minute starts now.
I think the way the Arabian economy works necessitates some sort of continuous growth, and happiness is a necessity for growth to be possible. If I recall correctly, the Circus Maximus is being built, or I don't know if it has been, which
believe
should
it's in build.
provide some buffer happiness. And we're working on happiness buildings like circuses and stadiums a lot. And I acknowledge that this is a problem that's going to need constant input from governors and ministers to help keep the happiness good enough. And this will be one of our priorities for this term, for sure.
Alrighty, thank you. Now it's you're up to the bat, QI. Your minute starts now.
So I fully agree with the Prime Minister on this issue. I think that the ministry is in a place to improve happiness across Arabia by enacting social policies. I think that happiness is important for growth, and well, the middle name of my party is growth. Uh, so I guess the other comment I have concerning happiness is the limits of the game's ontology concerning happiness. Which I think of coliseums and circuses and things like that, and uh, they're entertainments, but they're not. They don't necessarily purport like a richer conception of happiness in Aristotelian sense, um, in the sense of say eudaimonia. And so the concept of happiness is shallow, but insofar as it's important for growth, I think it's important.
Thank you, QI. And finally, Weska. Wes, your minute starts now.
I think happiness is very important. I definitely think the ministry should have a role in making sure that we maintain a level of positive happiness. That's why I personally voted for forcing production of a coliseum and a circus in the last game session because we need the happiness. I would love to work with the governors. I didn't want to have to do it, but we needed the happiness. It's vital for the war effort. If we are unhappy, our troops are even more unhappy. The home front is the most important front. Uh, so it's definitely uh, a big concern of mine, happiness. If we are unhappy, we're doing something wrong.
All right, thank you, Mr. Westcott. And now we are in open forum for about 5 minutes. You could start asking each other questions. Just keep the debate civil and not boring or toxic. Your 5 minutes starts now.
So there's something I wanted to come back around, which is the approach to which other ministers have agreed of using Article 1, Section 2.3 of our Constitution to force production of certain happiness buildings, which has been used twice during last streams, and which I think wasn't warranted given the circumstances. And I absolutely prefer, in every case, working in cooperation with governors to try and provide for real solutions that don't break the executive cooperation. And we're going to need to maintain executive cooperation this term. So I think we need to have a serious talk with all members of the executive about how that article is used.
I definitely agree. I think it should be preserved for only when it's absolutely necessary. Um, but I think in this case, it justifiably was absolutely necessary. If we let our happiness slip, and keep in mind, our cities are still growing at, they haven't stopped growing. They just keep getting bigger. So we need to keep adding to our happiness to catch up with that. And sadly, we kind of were forced to force this production.
All right. Is there any other comments anyone else would like to make before we move on?
Yes. I guess responding to the other candidate's concern in the chat concerning my expounding of a richer concept of happiness. I'm just going to say that I value civic humanism. I value, say, pronouncing Vroslav as Vroslav as opposed to Rocklaw, and things like that, because I think like an educated person in power is generally a good thing.
Anyone would like to respond to that, or we should move on to the next question?
I'd like to add a comment, not a response.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I would only like to mention that I believe that in these times of war, what we should do with happiness is see it as another resource, and make sure that our people remain happy, because we cannot simply expect our troops to fight for a nation that they don't believe in. And I believe that happiness is a good indicator to know whether we're doing a good job or not, and whether our people believe in what we are doing right as the government or not.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Any other comments before we move on? Alrighty.
I would like to say one quick thing. Our
Okay.
happiness is based off of global trade. We get our luxury goods that provide most of it from city-states and other civs. That's why I've been one of the biggest proponents of global trade in the ministry. Uh, I'm always proposing new deals, editing deals when they come to our desk. I think that's definitely a big factor in the happiness, is all I'd like to say.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I think we should move on to the next question. Everyone agrees to that?
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Alrighty. QI, you're up on the hot seat now. Here's your personal question. Your anti-war demonstrations during game sessions have been noted by the Arabian public as interesting, to say the least. You have at multiple times called for the end of the game session after peace still came through, as well as filibustered the initial declaration of war against England. Can you explain to the audience why you think these actions are necessary? You have 1 minute to respond, starting now.
So I don't know that my filibuster felt like a last resort. Like it's not the kind of tactic I would repeat again. It doesn't represent good civic virtue on my part, and I regret it. But at the same time, I do think that the gravity of this war was underestimated, and we've already seen those 200,000 dead or misplaced, and I don't want to see more of that. And so, and not only that.
Alrighty.
Hello?
Would anyone else want to make a comment on that statement? Anyone?
Yeah, so I don't think there was sound for the last, like, 45 seconds or so.
Oh, really?
What? No, I heard QI.
Oh yeah, I heard everything.
Did you hear it
Yeah,
on
I
the
heard.
stream?
Oh, right. I have the stream muted because I can't,
Yeah.
stand.
There's no sound from it, yeah. So you might want to repeat what you just
Oh.
said.
Yeah, sorry. So, can you repeat your response, please?
Yes, I can repeat my response. And I'm going to say that my filibuster was a last resort, and it's not the kind of thing that I would try to do again. But I don't know. We've already had 200,000 casualties in this war, and this wasn't a justified war in the same way that the Punic War was. And like, this isn't the kind of like civic virtue that I want to exercise. But this was a cause that really did compel me in that moment. And concerning peace with England, we were offered a trade deal in which they would give us 66 gold per turn for 30 turns in reparations. And so that's really that's quite a deal. And that's something like at least half of the English revenue and
It
taxes.
is not at
So
all. They make in the 200s.
okay, even so, it would level us in terms of income with England, quite possibly.
I think that's I think this is pretty false. It's definitely not half.
Okay, sure, it's not half, but even so, it would level us, relatively speaking.
Am I allowed to comment?
Yes, you are allowed to comment. Let's Jigao go.
Yeah, I was gonna. I only want to say that
Hello?
even though it may have been 1,000 gold per turn, we shouldn't accept it because we are not doing this war for money, and that will essentially be the message we were sending to the world. We're doing this war for not only for us but for every other country that has been built by England, and to ensure the safety of our allies and ourselves. That's why we're doing this war, and I don't think that we should use the monetary incentive as England tried to give us to remain in their hegemony as an indicator of whether we should peace out or not.
Alrighty. Does anyone else have any questions?
Yes, I'd like to respond to that.
Okay.
So no, I wouldn't cheapen the war and say it was a war for money. I mean, we've gone down that rabbit hole in a way already. I mean, England was willing to bring peace to the table. I think that's something that matters. I think that we don't need to continue this war. And it was an opportunity right in front of us for us to negotiate. And like refusing to negotiate just doesn't sit well.
Alrighty. I think everyone has made their comments, right? So we could move on to some viewer questions before I move on to my last prepared question.
Sure.
Alright. First off, are any of you gunning for any executive positions, starting with Westcott?
Yes. Probably PM.
Alrighty. QI, are you gunning for any executive positions?
No, not as of now.
Okay. Thoughtful, are you gunning for any executive positions next term?
I think I'm going for PM again.
Alrighty. And Jagal, are you gunning for any executive positions?
Not really, but I will willing to take a role if it was needed for to serve my people.
Okay, pretty good, pretty good. Taylor wanted to ask you, janitor, how your premiership would be if you get elected again.
My premiership?
Yes, he specifically pinged me about your the government under your premiership could be back.
I'm gonna be honest, I don't know what that word means.
As in, like, under you as PM.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, as PM, I try my best to organize votes and to make sure of the legality of everything we're doing. It's an habit of mine to call out the other ministers when we are neglecting a law or the legislature, among other things. And I think we need someone who is able to compromise at times on important issues, which I haven't seen a lot from Wes, and which I
totally
have done
disagree.
most importantly on the topic of war.
Totally disagree with you there. I think on a lot of bills, I compromise just fine. Yeah, I would want some specific example there.
Mostly big bills, I think you don't compromise on. I don't know, did audio cut?
So, wait, hold on.
Oh, apparently
As
the
a
audio's cutting. Oh, wait, hang on. Yeah, the audio's cutting.
Yeah, okay.
Oh wait.
Yeah, my headset's dying, sorry. So
No,
it's
it's back. It's back. It's back.
yeah,
Okay.
it stopped right about when you started talking, Thoughtful.
Okay, so try again. All right, go again.
So, the examples I was thinking about were things like the Kobe Nova Act, were things like the what we talked about last week about nukes, etc., where when an issue is significant to your platform, you're not very willing to compromise on it. The best you compromise is sometimes accepting that governors build factories, etc.
Yeah, I
Which
don't think that's represent. I don't
you
compromise on my core environmentalist beliefs, I'll tell you that for sure, because I believe there's not much room to compromise. But I definitely will compromise on war. I took the first Punic War Act. I took the first Punic War and I went with it, even though it didn't let us take any cities, which I still think was a mistake. Uh, and of course, that went into Kobe Nova. For nukes, I don't want to see uranium mined any more than anyone else. Uh, I do believe we should be able to have an arsenal. I think we should try our best not to use that. It should be a last resort and uh, a tool we only need because other people have it too. Uh,
yeah, that's
so
a
I
bit
think to
of my
say that I'm
point. I'm
somehow a hardline warmonger or unwilling to compromise is very
well,
disingenuous.
I think that's the difference between you and me is that I'm ready to compromise on some core beliefs if it means a more coherent ministry, and you're way less willing to do
Well,
that.
I
That was my
don't.
original point.
I'm not obstructionist about it, is the thing. I'm not stopping governors from building factories. I'm not trying to vote to force production and stuff. If they build it, they've deemed the environmental cost worthy for their citizens. I don't believe that destroying our earth is worth short-term profits. That's just what I believe. Uh, if mortgaging the future of our grandchildren's children so that we can have more boats today, I just don't believe that's a fair trade.
All right. Can we move on to the next question then?
Yes, I was just saying. Is there any question that was asked last night that you wish to answer,
um,
or can we move on to the final question?
can we talk about how Angus got removed from PM again?
I would believe that would not be fair to him, but you could make a quick
I'm
statement.
kidding. No. I was AG in that administration, and he was fine. I think it was just a political disagreement with his ministers.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, that was that. I'll allow. Anything else? Any question you want answered from last night, or no? I'm taking that as a no, and we're moving on to the final question. Uh, Although the Anglo-Arabian War has dominated the public discourse this election cycle, there has been little talk about what to do after the war is over. Please explain to the audience what your plans are for post-war Arabia. I'll start off with you, Westcott.
So post-war Arabia, uh, luckily, I don't believe the war has affected our mainland too much. So I think it can pretty much be business as usual. But the real thing we need to be looking at post-war is England. Uh, we need to make sure they're not falling into autocracy or anything. We can't beat them that bad. I would like to see recently the Oxford War Bill V2 passed, which allows us to take Corinth, which means we can possibly liberate Greece back onto the map. I definitely hope we can get that done. Uh, but I think the most important thing we need to do for post-war Arabia is make sure our economy is strong and our people are cared for. Last term and the term before that, we've had a lot of advancements in our hospitals, new medical labs coming out. I think investing in those is important because keeping our citizens fed and healthy is #1 priority.
Alrighty, thank you, Westcott. Uh, QI, your minute starts now.
So, uh, I suppose the I I don't know uh, precisely the state of the game on this, but we're at the point now where we can build research laboratories, and those laboratories can accelerate our science to the next level and propel us towards the science victory. I also want to agree with the general that prioritizing hospitals and medical labs is important. I certainly agree with Governor Taylor's policies in that regard, and would like to see them continued.
I'm sorry, Governor
Thank
Taylor
you.
has built a bunch of hospitals. What do you mean by that? So you
Thank
didn't
you.
agree with me?
Wait for the open forum, Wes. Wait for the open
He
forum.
directly addressed me.
I understand that, but wait for the open forum. Then you get to
Okay.
pile on people. Thoughtful, your turn. You have the floor.
So, research lab are generally done, which is why I'm not prioritizing them because they have been built everywhere. Because we have researched plastic very soon, in part due to my vote, but in part due to many other people's votes, such as Mouse King. Post-war Arabia, in my opinion, has to be focused on space while maintaining a strong and a strong level of growth. So the main focuses, to my mind, will be production, science, and happiness, to make sure the spaceship is completed as soon as possible, and to make sure we don't face an internal crisis between that. Post-war Arabia, to me, is looking towards the star.
Great. Thank you, Thoughtful. And finally, Jago, what's your plan for post-war rape? You have the floor.
Well, I believe everything has already been said, but I will simply try to focus on the space race and try to improve our economy in any way we can. I agree with Wes and with Janitor on those factors, and also on the fact that we should just build as many hospitals as we can, but always making sure that our main focus is our technological race, and not let our other desires get in the way of that. Thank you.
Alrighty. Since Wes, you were directly addressed in the statements, you get to go first in the open forum, and that will start now. You have the floor.
Okay, so QI, did I hear you right when you said you don't support what I just asked for with continued expansion of hospitals and medical labs, but you do support Governor Taylor's policy in the area, which has been to build hospitals?
No, I'd like to clarify. I meant that I agreed with you, and that's something that's relatively rare.
Okay, I'm sorry. Then I yield my time.
Alrighty. Any other comments made? Or I think we are good to move on to closing statements.
Sure.
Jago, looks like you want to say something, or you're ready for closing
No,
statements.
I'm ready.
Alright, so since there's no objections, we're moving on to closing statements. I'll start off with you, Westcott, and then we'll move down the list. You have 3 minutes to make your closing statement, starting now.
So I think what's very important for this ministry election and what you have to consider is we're probably going to win, but it's the last steps towards that victory are important, and they will. If you assume the game continues after this, RP wise, they're going to be very important going into the new era. Um, that's why I think a policy of healthy environmentalism to make sure our world doesn't decay and that we're not forced to leave it, that we get to live on this live on this earth for another 80,000 years, however long we've been here. This is civilization's pretty old. I think it's important to keep that healthy, but I also think it's important to keep our people and our troops safe now, which is what we are doing in this English war. It's about keeping Arabia safe and making sure that there's not another superpower on this earth that can contest our power and possibly bring ruin to our civilization. I don't think they can, but I don't want to see a day when they can either.
Yield your time.
Yes.
Thank you. Mascot. Now, Jago, you have your opportunity to make your closing statements in 3 minutes, starting now.
Well, I would like to say that I'm very pleased by this debate, and if any of us get elected, I am pretty sure that the future of Arabia will be bright. But I will only like to mention that I also agree with Wes about the fact that we need to we need to not only put our efforts here, but we also need to think of what will happen to the Earth. But anyways, regarding that, I finally want to say that I will be very pleased with whatever happens because I'm pretty sure that whoever gets elected will do a great work.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Now, Thoughtful, you will get your chance to make your closing statement, starting now.
I want to note that that's great sportsmanship on the part of Jagal, uh, saying such statements about everyone's competency, with which I agree for the most part. In general, I disagree with Wes about a lot of policies, but you gotta recognize that the man is a great government official and that he is efficient when he does stuff, which is in part why I named him Lieutenant Prime Minister this term. For the future, I think space has to be our main focus, as I've said a lot, and I will simply try this term to continue with what has been my policy and New Arabia's policy, which has been to pursue a goal, to go for ambition in the legislature, and to try to have a stable, a good government with integrity at the forefront, and never letting that get getting never compromising integrity to try and achieve political goals, which is a tactic I despise and which I have never tried and never will.
Alrighty, that's your closing statement.
It is.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Thoughtful. And finally, QI, you get to make your closing statement, starting now.
So I'm going to first. I'd like to thank the other debaters here this afternoon and this evening, um, and I'll just close by saying it's almost always better for a country to be at peace than at war. And like, if we're not at war, we can fully dedicate our wealth to the flourishing of our citizens and institution. We can invest in welfare state. Uh, we don't need to send our youth abroad to be scarred by the terrors of the battlefield. We don't need to exclude even a single human being from our moral circle. And we can engage in better commerce and forge friendships with other peoples and other nations. And I'll say that the abuse of the institutions of science by demagogues, by regimes, by conspiracies to further their ends is egregious, and that the achievement of uh, sending a rocket ship to Alpha Centauri uh, seems to be the pinnacle of not just Arabian scientific achievement, but of human scientific achievement. Science is, in my opinion, an international endeavor, um, and uh, yeah, that's about it.
Okay, thank you, QI. I believe that will end our debate. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Plus. Thank you, Jagow. Thank you, Janner. Thank you, QI, for coming out here today. May the odds be ever in your favor this cycle. Thank you, and good night.